Welcome to Your Next Tech Startup. I'm host Isabel Rasmussen. Today we are going to be speaking with Steven, who just landed a new role. We're going to talk about how this job search has been different than previous ones and why he chose to go from a director role to a principal engineering role. Steven, please introduce yourself.
Sure, sounds good. Hi, everyone. My name is Steven Ramirez. I've been an engineer for 17 years. I've done a little bit of everything from low-level game engine development to back-end infrastructure, dealing with millions of users. And over the last 5 years, I've been doing architect roles, director roles, overseeing uh, globally distributed teams.
Awesome. And so first thing, you created one of the Zinke diagrams. Did I say that right? Okay.
Yeah, sync diagrams. Yeah.
So you sent your resume into 53 companies. Um, and then you had 5 recruiter reach outs. Um, and as far as interviews went, you did 11 phone screens,
Yes.
4 on-sites, which I will say 4 on-sites to offer in this market is incredible. And then you landed a principal role and you did it incredibly fast, right? You were only on the market for
Yeah, roughly 44 days.
44 days. Yeah, which is a lot of people are unfortunately looking for a lot longer than that.
Right. Yeah.
A lot of people are kind of thinking they're frustrated with their search, something's not going right with it. You have been an IC, you have been an architect, you've been a director, and you this time you just decided to go back to an IC role. And kind of what were some of the things in regards to interviewing for director roles that were different in this market that um, made it really difficult?
Yeah. So compared to a couple of years ago, it is a very, very different place to be at just doing a job search. I think one of the things that I can primarily call out is when you get to be a director or manager of managers, the questions tend to involve a lot of in-depth knowledge about how to deal with people, situations, and the business that it comes to deal with. You need to be thinking multiple moves and multiple years ahead of how do you grow not just the teams and the skills, but also serving the company. And I was surprised this time around being a couple of years just being an architect and director, how some of the questions of being a director primarily change. I've interviewed at startups that were just in the angel phase, receiving initial funding,
Mhm.
and the kind of questions that I was receiving were actually much more oriented to like a CTO, like a co-founder,
Uh-huh.
where you were dealing with uh, funding entire teams, funding how do you deal with non-technical stakeholders? How do you present? How are you able to navigate difficult discussions very, very quickly with different types of audiences? Those type of questions primarily came up much more this time around than in previous years, where more teams and hiring was readily available. So, like the skills market, you had to be good at, did change over time. As a director, there was a very noticeable change in some of the skills needed. It could be the companies I was applying at, they were particularly looking for something. But on the other hand, it definitely felt like it was much more commonplace now where you had to bring a higher level of skills and foresight and being able to take on uh, the people engagement role much better this time around.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear. I mean, I guess like yeah, an angel, we won't dive too much into that, but like feeling like you had to interview at a CTO level to get a director role. Um I think there is this like this a little bit of this dynamic in the market that like you have to like demonstrate at like you're interviewing for this level role and you have to demonstrate your ability at this level role, and then
Right.
unfortunately the pay is going to be at this level, like
Correct.
yeah. And so and I think that in general is helpful for people to think about almost like you have to be would you say overqualified for the role that you're interviewing for? And if you're actually equally qualified for the role that we're interviewing for, the likelihood of getting the role is low.
Yeah. Um, I love that question. So the hardest lesson I've had to learn as a director is wearing different styles of leadership and hats and building context as fast as possible to choose which hat to wear. What makes a director interviewing process, especially in this market, harder is you have way more limited time with people because there's so many other people on the market, and you're dealing with folks who can
So when you
evaluate
say
you.
way more limited time, do you mean it was like a 30-minute interview that you felt you had to throw in 60 minutes worth of content?
Roughly, yeah. For some interviews, it definitely felt like there just wasn't enough time, especially when talking through would you navigate expanding a team to, a uh, new country, right? How are you thinking about developing and iterating across a multi-year roadmap? There's a lot of context questions that you have to ask, and how quickly you can navigate through it to land on the different permutations of success. It was definitely a challenge. I think one of the main distinctions
Mhm.
is how have folks thought about AI, the applications of AI,
Yeah.
team dynamics, and what the business does next with that intersection. It actually came up much more this time around about the internal product teams were really navigating this AI space recently, and having not just some experience with building ChatGPT models, models,
Mhm.
foundational models to work with, but also how do you navigate that with teams? You have less resources to do more. And
Mm.
so, one of the things that a coach has taught me is your role as director is being able to drive clarity and to disambiguate the through line for how you navigate this path. And I think that's one of the major differences now. You basically are struggling with harder business context because there's AI is impacting a lot of things right now.
Yeah,
There's also a lot of interesting interest from startups that want to get into that space too. At the
right,
same time, they have either less funding or they have less people to navigate that with, or they want to stay within constraints of some budget.
right.
So that's those are the other things you have to account for in your answers. And that's why
Okay,
some of the questions that came up, like I could use another 2 hours to research and give you the right thing, but I have an hour with you to discuss a very in-depth, very hard problem.
right. No, that makes a lot of sense. It's like, right, to do a lot more with a lot less.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, which I mean, I think is a helpful thing to think about, like, when people are interviewing is that is the constraint at the moment, is how to do a lot more with a lot less, and kind of AI is, like, promising the ability to do that.
Yes.
Um, so, like, it feels like the constraint should be acceptable or yeah,
Yep.
complicated.
Complicated.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's move to, your new role. You've
Yeah.
been, a principal engineer for is it 3 months now?
I've been at Piloto Labs for 5 months since
5
November of last
months.
year.
Okay,
Yeah.
wow. Are you enjoying being a principal engineer versus managing a team?
Yeah. So being a director, what you'll find is there's different hats people tend to wear in that kind of position.
Mhm,
I always consider myself a player coach. That's always been the kind of hat where I've dealt with like the hardest problems, built the most success, and that's
mm,
generally what I tell people in interviews. That I'm a player coach first. To be a player coach, you have to be a player. So kind of when I left Clio last year, I knew one of the things was I kind of want to go back to first principles about why I got into engineering
mhm,
and being able to get back into solving problems, directly being on the front lines of a lot of these issues, especially in Bill Labs, who is getting and expanding into this gaming poker space again. I was at poker for Zynga Poker for years, and kind of am back at it. It's a familiar problem. I love this space,
Mhm.
working with some really talented people, and honestly, being able to come in early on the ground floor and work on some of these new frameworks and help grow out the space has been amazing. I love it. I'm so happy I had this opportunity.
Yeah. Oh, I'm really happy for you. Um, and like I think that like I love that analogy of like the player coach and like cuz I will say like I recently helped make a hire at a startup and it was someone who I think their previous title had been VP of engineering and they were hired as a senior software engineer and the founder kind of got caught up on that, like, was just like, "Why?" But I talked to a lot of engineers who they want to get back into it for like,
Yeah,
I've talked to people who, they've been in, like, engineering leadership, and with AI coming out, like, they just want, like, a hands-on IC role where, like, they can, like, learn and explore from an IC perspective to kind of like up level the next 10 years for their career.
absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I wish that there was more understanding around why it makes sense for people to move between leadership and IC roles. And yeah, and so hopefully somebody listening and hears your perspective and gets that. Like, because I think the way that you explain it, it makes perfect sense. And I think with everything that is changing in the tech space right now, um, it makes a lot of sense. I also think like being a director and being an engineering manager, like all my years of working with hiring managers, they are way more stressed out than ICs, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That
yeah.
Yeah, the thing that nobody tells you about being a director is as you level up in people management and you get manager, senior manager, director, each step up is climbing a mountain where there's less air. If imagine feedback is air and people are telling you like you're doing great, you're doing bad, the further up the ladder you go, the less air you will have, eventually to a point where it can feel like free fall. Being a director is both uh super fun, but at the same time, you just don't get the feedback loops you had as an IC. It's hard to
Right.
know if you're doing the right thing.
Huh. Yeah, and that can be really stressful.
It can be super stressful.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's really unfortunate. But yeah, upper management is complicated. Um all right. Well, I am so happy for you. I'm happy that you only took 44 days, that you're in a role that you love, that you're back in gaming. And I hope that other people can um, relate to what you shared and maybe learn something. So thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much for having me.